Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Disclosure tonight. Tonight we're having a conversation with Tim Ventura. Is that me? Tim Ventura. Oh, apparently I have more windows here open. No, someone in the back. We're good on that one. Hey, good evening, everybody. Happy Friday. Hopefully you've had a good week. Let's go ahead and just welcome in our audience and see who the heck we have out there. We've got it's got to be me. There we go. Click that window. I haven't done that one in a while, but let's have some fun anyway. Let's go ahead and take a look who the heck we have out in the audience. Let's go ahead and start up the... Oh, where's my drums? Let's get this up and going. 2 seconds. Yeah, I knew I just jumped into this in the wrong way, but let's do it anyway. Here we go. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and welcome in our crowd today. Who in the heck do we have out there? Let's go ahead and welcome in our participants in today's chat. That's Abby Araxa, Anonymous Rex, the original good-looking Mr. Anthony Mack After Death is here. Christine Lynn is around along with Donald Harris. Eli McGinnis, Firefly is in the chat along with Frank and Stein. Good to see you, Frank. Jay Katz along with Kelly and Kelly Bro with those piercing blue eyes. Good to see you, Kelly. She really does have piercing blue eyes. You just got to blow her picture. You'll see what I'm talking about. Laura Campbell's here along with Little. Melissa Hogan made it in along with Metal Gaming all the way from Denmark. Good to see you, Martin. Mick Mix around along with Misty Rain, Mr. Catfish 2100. Yerp, my friend. Neil Carr is joining us along with Paul Damon, Resonate, Rough Ready. The Shelly Montgomery. Shelly, you're here. Great to see you, made it, my friend. Who else do we have out there? We have Shermanator Osborne, our resident ancientologist, along with Spider Grandmother. Good to see you, my little lady with 8 legs. Or is it 10 these days? I think it's 8. Let's go ahead and welcome in Sunny Day, TK, Tony Day, Two Head 666, Watching Vids, Wildcat Mahone, and Neil Tommy Tanker, also known as Andy. Yeah, he's about done with work, and he'll be joining us a little bit later on. How about that? We've got a great conversation, literally a conversation going on with Tim Ventura, but I have to preface this, no black suit today, no dark background. It'll be a good one. On that note, let's go ahead and welcome in our friends in the back. Let's go ahead and see who the heck we have out there. Well, we've got a dear friend of ours. He likes talking a lot about the political spectrum. Let's welcome in Mr. Brian Pemble. How's it going, Brian?
It's going great. I'm looking forward to hearing from Tim, and I just want to thank you and Michael for putting this on, and really looking forward to it, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I greatly appreciate that, my friend. Also in the back, we've got a man coming from the country where all the U's are silent. Let's welcome in Mr. Michael Suckloff. How's it going, Michael?
It's going good, Thomas. Welcome, Tim. It's going to be a good show.
I hope so. Also coming in from a state that I used to call Boregan, but it's clearly not boring because Neil Carr lives there. Neil, how the heck are you, my friend? Hello, Thomas. Good to see you. Also coming to us from New York, let's welcome in our dear friend, Tia Loreno. How's it going, Tia?
It's going good, Thomas. I'm excited for your show. Can't wait to see what you got in store.
Oh, can't wait to see where this goes as well. That wraps us back to our dear friend Mike. Disclosure, Mike. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well and looking forward to the conversation with Tim tonight. And it's our Friday night show. Great way to start the weekend off. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Nice, easy conversation where for once Tim gets to do all the talking. On that note, I want to go ahead and welcome in our dear friend also from Washington State, I believe. Let's go ahead and welcome in Mr. Tim Ventura from Tim Ventura Interviews. How's it going, Tim?
Doing well. Okay, there we go. I'm not used to using, so we're doing this on Google Meet. Can I out you on that? We're using
That's
Google
fine,
Meet.
yeah.
I've used Zoom in the past, StreamYard, Riverside, so now we're doing Google Meet. So
the reason I use Google Meet from a presenter to a presenter standpoint is that it does the work for me. Meaning if Mike says something like, now he just coughed, his name and picture automatically pops up. Back to you, Tim. You say something and you automatically pop up.
Okay. So yeah. I think you could set Zoom up like this. So I'll have to come up with creative stuff to say then. That way otherwise I'm in trouble.
There's a lot of people in the back of learning to make a little bit of noise. The mic pops, the picture, or I can, if necessary, I can always bring out the pin and pin you in for everyone. Don't show again.
Am I-
Pin this tile. I can go ahead and pin you into place, and then you're going
I'm
to be
not
stuck in there
gonna-
forever.
But thank you. That's very thoughtful.
Wonderful to have it. Yeah, it's just something that works. I use it for work all the time, and I found a way to make it work for me. And thank God you've got a great data connection, because it purely shows. It really shows, my friend. It's great to have you here. Usually you're the man who's on the other side of the mic going ahead and interviewing people. I know today you just had a great interview with Darcy Weir talking about transmedium, UAP, and USOs, talking about that new recent video he came out with. But earlier, 22 hours ago, you were with Alejandro Rojas. You've hung out a lot with Jack Safardi, with Rich Hoffman talking about the historic UFO report, and so many people, to name the least, that it's just an amazing, roundup of conversations that you have, 3 times a week?
Yeah, well, so it's not on a firm schedule, right? I started out with, and the reason I call it interviews was this goes back to like 2000, 2001-ish. I started doing like work with scientists. And what I would find was, at the time I was writing, and I'd get a scientist on the phone, and they would tell me all of this absolute gold, and I would only be able to take notes on a tiny part of it. And so at some point along the way, I just started recording it, and it was like, hey, do you mind if I put this recording up? And so it kind of evolved into a podcast, right? And that does not mean that I invented anything, because your Rush Limbaugh and your Art Bell and all those types, they were actually podcasting. They would take their radio broadcast and put it on the web long before that. But so for me, that's kind of what it evolved out of, and I still have components of that. I still try and think of like, here's a topic that I would like to focus on. Here's a subject matter expert that I can work with, and sometimes, a lot of times, it's the person who developed or invented an idea or a technology. Other times, it's someone who can speak effectively on it, even though they're not directly related. So it's, everyone has their different approach to things, right? And that's kind of mine.
Yeah. So, but I have to say the amount of people that you bring on a regular basis is just astounding. And clearly people love your format. And how long have you been doing this for now?
Well, I mean, off and on over 20 years, 22, 23
Wow.
years, something like that. So, I have a large network, and like our focus here, I guess, probably is mostly on UFOs. Although, I have thoughts in that area as well in terms of focus and
Yeah.
interdisciplinary work. But, in terms of UFOs, I've been on a lot of these lists. I've communicated with these people going back decades, right? I mean, so it's pretty easy to just kind of, work my network and try and get their thoughts and ideas. And then I guess the other part too is I try and frame my questions. So my opinion comes through in the framing of my questions, right? To some degree, but I try not to put words in people's mouth. I try not to manipulate people, So it's like the way that I look at it is, there's an existing story narrative, right? And you could look at something like, like the Schumer-Rounds Act that recently happened. Okay, well, that was a response to David Grush, and then you've got the legislature involved in it. And then I'll start with something like that and say, okay, here are some of the basic facts. Let's run through some questions for that. And then let's start to get a little more speculative. And so that's kind of my, my shtick, as it were,
Yeah. I got you. It's just one of those things. Trust me, I know some people are saying your audio is a little bit of cloudy and muffled, but I have to say, compared to your other headset, it sounds a lot better. It's a little bit more bassy, so I think it's coming across great. So yeah, you'll frame the questions. You get the, if you want to call it, you walk not a user. You walk your guests through the journey of talking with these important people. But what doesn't come out of it is, how do you feel about the Schumer-Rounds Amendment? You talk to so many great people. You try to hear where they're coming from. We'd love to go ahead and hear where your thoughts are on where disclosure is and where potentially things can head that beyond this drought that we've been in for too many months to count. the drought talking about there's no new news, there's nothing else going on?
Well, I mean, I've done probably in terms of guests, or at least shows, I've done 70 something, I think, in the UAP, and that's all in the last, really the last 2 years. So I would say I've seen so many different perspectives on it, right? A lot of it depends on how you're approaching it and how you're framing it. And I know it's difficult to, and in that way, I feel for the congressional and the government people, the legislative people who are working on this. I'm sure they're in the same boat. When you see so many different perspectives and so many different angles, it tends to blur out a little bit, right? I mean, you're going to meet people who have a specific narrative, and they're like, this is the way things are, and it has to be this way. And anything that goes against that is not true. But what you'll find is, as you, and Thomas, you're probably in this boat, the more people that you talk to, the more perspectives and opinions that you see, right? The more it rounds out that view. And it becomes really difficult to take, a strong opinion and say, this is absolutely true, because you'll talk to somebody tomorrow who may have a different opinion that makes complete sense. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something from us as we're looking at this, trying to get through it, trying to understand we know we all have to have patience, but we've also seen a lot of people who have had patience for a period of time going ahead and literally losing their mind and flipping over to the other side of the coin, going from someone who's pro-disclosure to people who are anti-disclosure, and just going, how do you put it? Trying to throw as many people under the bus as they're going along. And it's just, I'm not sure if this is just an effect of the process of going through. Go ahead.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I mean,
we've had podcasters, we've had people on Twitter who have been who are positive about disclosure, promoting Lou Elizondo, Grush, and others, but then they get to the point of saying, okay, where's it at? Where's the information? How are we going to get forward? We're stuck here. Why aren't you moving this thing forward? And that angst, why isn't it happening on my time frame versus the time frame that it should be going on? And you have people like good old Lou Reviews and other people who are going out there and just completely flipped and are like lining up with people like Green Street and Goofon and others who are just whatever they can do to throw people under the bus who are trying to move it forward. They're coming out as they're more of a denier than they are someone who's willing to have an open mind and accept the truth.
Okay. And I'm trying to kind of think through how that might play out. I don't follow Twitter that closely, and maybe I should follow it more closely. I mean, it seems like that's where the discussion is. But then at the same time, you've got a lot of personalities, right? And you have a lot of pundits, and you have a lot of analysts and stuff like that. And one of the things that I'm noticing is you have people commenting more on each other than they are on the issue in some ways. And some of that can be useful, right? Some of that is necessary, but too much of it, and it just becomes like politics,
Yeah. But unfortunately, politics, as we move on, seems to be more and more intertwined with getting disclosure out. And we're actually relying on politics now to try and pressure the DOD to bring out the truth, which is just a catch-22 situation, because we're going back to politicians who, how much can you really trust them? Going after the DOD, how much can you trust that branch? And we're having to put faith into an organization to get the truth out of it when we know they've been covering up and lying about it for 77 plus years.
Well, and then there's this question of who knows what, who knows how much, do they know anything? I mean, I do defense interviews. I have contacts all over the defense industry. I've been pretty public with my audience about the fact that statistically speaking, they say something like 38% of Americans believe in UFOs. And I think that brings with it, right? That brings with it this notion that they're extraterrestrial. Do you believe in UFOs? Well, we all know, and I think this baselines things for me is we have 75 years of cultural mythology about UFOs. So when you say UFO, nobody should have a mistake about what it is.
And that's why I still call them UFOs here in Disclosure tonight, because Lou was calling them UAP. I decided, let's call it UFOs. Even Lou's calling them UFOs now, because it's a word, like I usually say in a lot of start of every show, there's a word for it in every single language around the world throughout perpetuity. And if you say it, people understand it, but if you try to change it to a new scientific or government paradigm, you'll put out the word and people don't know what you're talking about.
So one of the challenges that I have, and I've been lectured about this, right? So this is, again, I have kind of a weird approach, but UFOs as a topic, UAP, UFO, whatever you want to call it, this is largely a cultural phenomenon, right? This is like 99% human. And then the other 1% is probably space aliens, but we are so, I mean, look at it right now. It's like, we're doing a podcast, we're discussing with each other, we have a group of people, other people are watching, they all have different opinions and input. This is like a human phenomena that maybe kind of sort of is related to aliens. And so there's so much cultural baggage here. And one of the things that strikes me is you get not related to the
Ventura, no.
But so you get so much of this, like this mythology that gets dragged into it. But when you see the government officials go on in C-SPAN or whatever, and then they talk about UFOs, and they give, especially like your senior DoD officials, and they give the blank stare, and they're like, well, it could be a UAP, and they act like nobody knows. How could you not know? I mean, so you didn't see Independence Day, you haven't seen, you don't know about like Area 51. I mean, these are a core of our culture, right? You can't have gone to a movie theater without knowing about UFOs and little gray men. That's just the way things are. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's reality. And I think we have to keep that in mind as well, is that this cultural mythology, a lot of this comes out of media and it forms our expectations, but that might not be what's going on. So it's a really complicated issue. It's one of those things that looks a lot simpler than I think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. You just put it in a very great way. You actually took my words away on that one. But that's a very appropriate kind of a position to take. And I wish it could be a better than it is. We haven't had a lot of information coming out, and it's now just a matter of trying to move things forward. Now, besides being involved and covering from a lot of the greats who are involved with the study of UFOs, from science to observers to experiencers. You've also been heavily involved with APEC, and from the science aspect of going after, anti-gravitics and stuff like that. If you can let our audience know of how you got involved with that and how it's become one of your passions.
Well, that was how I originally kind of got into this area. I got into it on the propulsion side, on the science side, and I know that you guys have had folks on who have, been on the APEC conference and stuff like that. Way back when, I was into this stuff in college, going way back when. I started a website called American Anti-Gravity in 2002, early 2002, for the lifters when that was popular. And I was doing my own work, and then before long, I started doing interviews and showcasing the work of other people as well, right? And so it became kind of a collaborative effort, and in a sense, almost like media for emerging propulsion and things like that. And so that has been the approach. Now, in my case, and again, something I've been very public about, I've been I would say I was a UFO non-believer for many, many years. And the reason was because I was like many people out there. I was like, show me the evidence, show me the evidence. And what the interesting part for me was, I took a break from this area for a while to do, day job, start a family, the whole 9 yards. I was doing some defense interviews on the side, and it was my Air Force and defense contacts who got me into the UAP thing. And I remember this is 2017, 2018-ish, because I was a little late into it. And they were like, you got to pay attention to this, Tim. And I remember at the time saying, you know what, I don't want to deal with it. I don't think it's real. I think it's all smoke and mirrors. And again, these are your government officials, right? And they're like, no, take this seriously. There's something going on. And what they were talking about at the time was, the original Leslie Kean article and all that kind of stuff. And it has continued to grow and evolve since then, right? But so, that's kind of what drew me back into it. What you were saying a moment ago, though, about moving disclosure forward, one of the things that I've wondered about that, again, this goes to the culture and the psychology of it. I think disclosure is happening or has already happened. You have the Office of Director of National Intelligence, who's come out point blank and said UFOs are a threat to air safety, right? UFOs are real. They're a threat to air safety, and now you've got the Schumer-Rounds Act, where they're saying, okay, they're not outright saying we have crash wreckage, but they're saying if crash wreckage exists, here's how it needs to be handled. Here's how it needs to be done. I think that we've already had initial disclosure. UFOs are real, right? The problem is we have been living in this, giggle factor world for so long that it's difficult for people to accept that.
Yeah. I hear you. And now here's one thing to go along those lines. Lou Elizondo came out a couple of years ago and said disclosure happened. Like you're saying, the OVNI, other people in the government are talking about it. But in reality, we're still in the process of disclosure because we're still dealing with parties within the government that are working their damnedest to go ahead and push back against the truth. They're still trying to push back and find any particular reason to try and discount events that are happening, try and say we have no proof, there's no evidence, there's nothing going on in the skies, which we all know is different. So we're in the process of disclosure, but from the reality of humanity, the media, and everyone, we're still at the ground level of trying to get the whole thing going.
One of the things when I spoke with Alejandro Rojas the other day that he was saying was, the government is not the best place to start with a lot of this stuff. He kind of gently said that, but, and there are different ways that you could frame that. But I mean, if we back up for a second and look at it, it's like, okay, this is our government, right? I mean, just look at what's going on with the election, it's like they don't have the best track record of making great decisions, So in terms of UFOs, we might have a better shot at this doing it just, collaboratively as a scientific community, as a community of people, as a culture, rather than trying to lean on the government, which again struggles with a lot of stuff like this.
Right. Lou Elizondo brought this up about a year and a half ago. He was talking about having not just a national lab, but an international lab that could be out there to go ahead and have collaboration on a civics level, on a scientific level, on a humanitarian level, and just look at all the different aspects we could be looking at this, not just from within the United States, but on a global standpoint. And that's something almost that we need, because we keep on hearing rumblings coming out of China that they have AI systems that they've gone and deployed for going observing and collecting information and bringing it back. And the U.S. is still fumbling around with, I guess we have Kirkpatrick's old crew talking about something called the new gremlin for going ahead and doing additional sensor information. And while the United States has had a lead on bringing the truth out for a period of time, it seems like we're almost getting to a point where we could lose that opportunity to be a leader on this, to bring the information forward. And we're almost giving the opportunity for a foreign government, maybe like Russia or China or someone else, to go ahead and say, here's the facts, here's what we've been seeing, here's where it really is. They could take into the efforts of what we've been trying to do in the United States and shut it down. Now, as well, China is also, we've heard in the past, that they potentially have 1 million people trying to solve this problem right now, where in the U.S., the actual number of people who are working on programs trying to figure this out number in the hundreds. So I guess it comes down to priority and how we're going to deal with it, because I guess it gets difficult for the government when, if they had to come out and say, yeah, we've never had superiority over our country in the skies, in the water, on the land. There's another civilization that's much more advanced than ours. There's nothing we can do to stop them. They're coming in. They're taking our people. They're bringing some of them back. They're observing all of our military operations. They're shutting down our nuclear warheads. We have absolutely no defense against them. Now, if you had the president or a world leader come out and say that, people might get a little bit freaked out and figured, well, if you're not in control, no one's in control, and go crazy.
Well, I mean, again, it's, you know, a lot of this comes down to framing, right? And so people like to think, we all like to think, that our government is omniscient and knows all and can do all and all that, right? But then, and there's a comfortability factor with that too. It's like, you know, maybe they're not making the best decisions, maybe they're hiding things from us, but at least somebody's in charge, right? But then think about it. So this very same UAP issue inspired sensor changes that let them see these Chinese spy balloons. You've got balloons with like sensor undercarriages the size of what, 3 city buses that are flying over the US, and they're just like, oh yeah, by the way, you know. So if you can miss something like that.
Well, that we didn't miss that one. We saw that one coming. It was the other 3, the one over Dead Horse, Alaska, the other one that was over the Yukon, and the third one that was down over Maelstrom Air Force Base that eventually made itself quarter of the way across the country over Lake Huron the next day, where we actually went and shot these things down. So we do have those big things, like you're saying, the size of 2 school buses, the arrays that are up there, versus these other things that are there, but they're moving with impunity, and we've, if you want to call it, covered our eyes, mouth, and ears. We don't want to hear about it. We don't want to see about it. We don't want to report on it. More importantly, we're going to take all of our sensors and make sure that you never see any of this stuff because you don't have the clearance to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and so I think I believe it was Kathleen Hicks who talked about overclassification, and that is something
that actually was Avril Haines.
Was it? Okay.
That was in her initial speech that she had at the National Cathedral, I believe, where she was saying we're dealing with a issue with overclassification of data within our government, and the one place that we need to go ahead and start with first is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. We're the same place that Grush was working. Go figure. That we have all of this data and we're overclassifying too much of it. Now, the sad part of it is, as we've been told by government insiders, that the weebies, meaning the part of the government that we be here before you, we be here after you, you're just an elected official, we're going to commit administrative suicide, and we're going to do whatever it's going to take to stop any of your efforts to change the classification system, because as the guardians of this, we don't agree with you, and we're not going to let you do that.
Yeah, and so that is something that truly does trouble me. I don't think that, you know, I mean, you could make whatever case you want about, you know, national defense, this, that, and the other thing, but this idea of, you know, the public is not allowed to know things, and more than just that, the public is not allowed to know that they exist. Again, I did an interview with Lester Mayer, and the way that he described it stuck with me. He said, you know, maybe the details of this should remain secret, but he said they should at least be able to characterize things, you know, like, okay, do you have crash wreckage? Yeah, we have crash wreckage. And guess what? It's from outer space. That, you know, now see, the problem is that this national security thing, you can keep edging this up more and more, right? And it's like, well, okay, if we reveal this, then they may know this. If we reveal that, then they may know that. Well, yeah, but you can use that justification for anything, right? So the problem needs to be this balance. And right now it seems like things are incredibly overclassified, and there's this need to know mentality. And this goes back to kind of the World War II industrial establishment, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I agree with everything that you and Tim just said. The problem is overclassification, obfuscation, and the fact that they don't want any part of this to come out to the public. Because I made similar points that Tim just made on the show when we've talked about this. They cannot reveal if something as small as a bolt, let's say there was an alien bolt, and they said, all right, we're going to let the public know that we're in possession of this bolt, and it's not made on Earth, and we're going to reveal that much. The problem would be is that's opening up Pandora's box. People are not going to let it go with that. Yes, I understand it's simply a bolt, but they're going to want to know more about the NHI, the UAP, the advanced civilization. How is it here? How did it get here? Why is it here? It's going to open up a door to questions from the press and the public that the government does not want to address or answer. And we all know that that's been the case the whole time, because once you go down that path, and I know every president that's been elected that went into office, they may have been pro-disclosure in their campaign, but when they went into the White House, they were told, if you open that door, you can't close it again. And no one, they're all gun shy as far as even trying to open that door up a crack. That's the problem we're up against. That's how, in my opinion.
Well, and again, one of the things that, and this is just speculation, but the DOE classification system, unless I'm mistaken, and I don't think I am, even the president doesn't have the authorization to override that DOE classification, because the authority—
He should, though. And here's the thing. Here's the one thing on this, Tim. If you look at the organizational structure of our government, the DOE, the DOD, all these different agencies all report up to the executive branch of the United States.
But that Q clearance, that nuclear clearance, that is congressional. That's legislative clearance. That is different. That's that's one of the things that struck me. Now, I could be completely mistaken on this, right? But my understanding is that your traditional, your secret, your top secret, all that stuff, right? All of those come from the executive branch. But that DOE clearance, that Q clearance.
But the DOE reports to the president, and it's under the executive branch, and the president of the United States has the ultimate authority to declassify anything within our federal government. Not that they're going and doing that, but that's just one of the situations of what we're looking at with regards to the presidency. And this, at least, this is something that I've focused on. Maybe I could be blind on this and not seeing it, but it's either the president himself holds that ultimate power, or it's the executive branch that holds and has a higher level of power. Because remember, the executive branch survives from presidency to administration going across, and maybe there's a higher level of ownership of the data that's part of the executive branch that maybe the president's not included in, because he should have the ultimate power.
Well, I mean, you would think so, but you know, there is something that's, I mean, I think, like, from what I understand, Obama, Clinton, I think Jimmy Carter, Donald Trump, they have all been, it's all been said that they had an interest in this, that they wanted disclosure of some kind, and yet they've all stopped. Now, it's also entirely possible that it's as simple as, hey, you know, you get elected, you walk in, you're president, you've got a country to run. You ask about UFOs and somebody says, you know, knock it off. You got to sign, you know, stacks of papers for all this other stuff. It could be that simple, that they are just so busy and overwhelmed. When they ask about it, they run to the giggle factor, you know? So I don't know. I tend not to be conspiratorial, though. I know that sounds strange, but what was that phrase? You know, never look for a conspiracy when incompetence will suffice, something around those lines. You know, the U.S. government is disorganized. We have a lot of competing organizations, poor communication. One of the things to keep in mind is, for the most part, the tools and technology that the government is using is behind the civilian sector, right? They are not as advanced in terms, I mean, even stuff like an iPhone. You know, the level of technology in a lot of these government organizations, especially in the military, they're locked into stuff that could be decades behind. So, you know, this is people doing the best that they can. And the other thing that I would say is, on every level, right, from city workers up to, you know, the executive branch, people that I meet in government are doing what they believe is the right thing for the right reasons. I haven't met anyone who's like nefariously evil or something. Our government culture is not perfect, but the people who are in our government, my impression is that they are trying to be wonderful public servants. So, I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Now, speaking with Elizondo in the past about this, he has said that he understands why the government, not that he agrees with it, but he's listened to the stories from the people who have locked it up and kept it from us. And based on the information that he heard that they were going through, he can understand why at that point in time that the U.S. government decided to take it and put it in the box and push it away and don't bring out the truth to the government. We would have hoped in the 77 years since some of these decisions were made that we would see a change in philosophy, yet it seems that you've heard all the stuff going on with Sean Kirkpatrick was part of RO, the mess that he made of the office when he was there, the bigger mess that he's making since he's there. It seems like we've doubled down on Project Blue Book 2.0 or 3.0 at this point to try and just deny as much of everything, which, we've got the Space Force came out a year ago and admitted, yeah, we've got UFOs. They're over the United States. They're a problem over our military sites. They're a problem over our country. But it's not just the United States. It's a global problem, and we're working with our partners around the world to try and figure this out. And this is what Space Force is saying. But then you've got Sean Kirkpatrick on the other side coming out to as many different parts of the media with RO and everything else saying there's nothing, there's no proof, we don't know anything. It's like Schultz from Hogan's Heroes basically trying to deny absolutely everything that's there, even to the point where I was looking at some of the stuff that people covered today where Kirkpatrick was talking about the Go Fast, and he was giving examples of saying, oh, this is exactly why you'd see it, this is why you would do it, you would see the reflection during the daytime because it was a balloon. But wait a minute, Sean. The examples you're giving don't apply because that craft was recorded at nighttime. So it's like they've got the information, but they think we don't have it. So they come up with their bullshit excuses to just try and confirm nor deny anything.
It's very confusing and convoluted. And I would agree that the approach that has been taken by the government officials, especially Aero, has obfuscated things, right? And and there's kind of this wink, nod at work also. One of these concepts is that one of these ideas that's been expressed is, what are UAP? Okay, well, we believe they're intelligently controlled. Is it from foreign adversaries, or could it be something else? And it's like, well, wait a minute. You've got something that's pulling 50 Gs. It can go into and out of water at high speeds. These are things where, ignoring the fact that it would liquefy a pilot, these would destroy any airframe that you could even hope to build. It doesn't matter what the materials are. This is outside of the scope of human engineering.
And here's the thing, too, when we had Kirkpatrick talking about some of these things, he focused on talking to the pilots from the USS Nimitz, not talking to people like Kevin Day or any of the radar operators who were there running the Aegis systems that actually saw what was going on and tracked it on the military sensors from the USS Princeton.
Yeah. So I believe that at the very least we need to have more transparency. We need to have more, I would say, intellectual honesty, right? I would also like to see more. I would like to see more thoughtful speculation by people like Kirkpatrick. I bet you he has opinions about this that he hasn't shared, and the justification would be, well, if he shared those might be the opinions of the official U.S. government. Okay, but you know what? I don't care. What I want is, I want to see him up at the mic saying, okay, here's what I think is going on. That would be helpful, and not just him. I would like to see various officials give their thoughts on, based on what I know right now, what do I think is going on, even if they think that's nothing. It helps. It helps to know, right? And so right now, I think the American people are feeling like they're getting a bit of a runaround. I think that's why people are so frustrated, right? People are saying that this Aero historical report is a Condon report 2.0, So that's, I think we're definitely past, we've crossed the Rubicon, right? I mean, we've got this admission, UFOs are real. They're a threat to airline safety. That's from the Office of Director of National Intelligence. That's what led to the creation of this thing to investigate them. So we have this baseline change, we know there's real. Okay, what is going on with that, So,
yeah, absolutely. Mike, you have some questions here.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Tim said. I have my doubts as far as Kirkpatrick ever changing the narrative that he's been putting out there wholeheartedly the whole time. There was a story today, believe it or not, and Thomas, before the show, I sent you a DM about it. The Daily Mail wrote a story that stated that Kirkpatrick was feeling threatened by members of the UFO community. They actually threatened his wife, his kids, and it turned out that it was a ufologist that actually showed up at his house.
It wasn't someone threatening him. It's just someone who showed up on his doorstep and rang his doorbell.
Correct. That's what it turned out. But when they first ran the story, it came across that Kirkpatrick was saying that he was being threatened by this community. And it turned out that that wasn't the case at all. So he's still spinning a negative narrative to what the truth is, even in his personal life.
Yeah. No, Mike. As soon as I heard it, as Brock said, it was Swan. We know it.
No, I sent you.
I know I'm joking on this one, but yeah.
It was not Sawan.
I know that. I'm just saying in general because he has got, he's one of those people, Tim, we're talking about earlier, who got pissed off at how slow disclosure's going and decided to flip from one onto the other. It's just one of those things that happens.
I do want to avoid this. I do want to avoid the government hating narrative, and that is something Alejandro Rojas talked on that in our interview yesterday. Is we need to collaborate, cooperate, work together, and embrace cooperative change and solutions. It can't be something where if the UFO community is just beating on the door. I mean, think about it. If you're in Aero and you open the window and you've got a mob outside with pitchforks and flaming torches, the last thing you're going to do is open the door and let them in, right? So what we need to do is find ways to work together. And I think the other part too is recognition that people who work permit, regardless of what they do, are normal people like the rest of us. They make the decisions they make for good reasons. Maybe they're not the best reasons. Maybe they don't serve everyone, but they're trying to do the best that they can. So again, I don't think it's a simple issue. I think it's very easy to pick a side and say, this is my side and all of you are bad. I think it's more complicated than that. And ultimately, I think that the solution is working together.
Yeah, and I agree. The whole thing is for us to get through is we have to, doesn't matter if you're in Team Lou or if you're in Team Greer, if you see one thing or another, the truth of the matter is we could all come together and point all of our fingers collectively at the federal government and saying the people that are going and responsible for this discord we're having is the federal government because of the lies, the disinformation, the misinformation campaigns they've been putting against the American public, which as far as I understand is against federal law.
Well, so let me give you an example. So Sean Kirkpatrick, who people accuse him regularly of being, anti this, anti that, cover things up, Condon Report 2.0. He published a paper with Avi Loeb about a year ago that speculated on Oumuamua being an alien mothership releasing probes into our atmosphere.
That parachuted down.
Scientific paper that they collaborated on together. So if he was truly anti-UFO, if he truly thought, this is all BS, I'm going to cover it up, he would not have put that out there in public.
But you got to remember, Avi, Kirkpatrick got in his car, drove for 3.5 hours from D.C. to Avi Loeb's doorstep, arrived unannounced, rang his doorbell so they could supposedly talk about the findings from the National Academy of Sciences coming out of Ukraine. So Avi Loeb that night could go ahead and write a letter discrediting the observations that are being made of these UFOs. There's clearly a conflict that goes on between those guys. Well, also in the paper you're talking about with regards to Oumuamua and dropping off probes, they also said it was absolutely impossible for the Tic Tacs to have moved from, was it 60,000 feet down to 50,000 feet in a fraction of a second, because they should have bursted into flames from the friction that's going on. And most absolutely what we're seeing is a defect of sensors taking all the information, the observations and the things we're doing, and just throwing all of that potential information out the window to say, we must look at this from a constrained view of physics, and if it doesn't go inside the box, it's not real. But when we're dealing with something that's so revolutionary, how can you put it inside of a box of what we know when reality, we don't know shit?
Yeah, and there's a famous saying, science moves forward one funeral at a time, right? And the meaning behind that, I have a dog walking around here. The meaning behind that is basically that these people are somewhat recalcitrant, right? And they're ornery.
That's my favorite word.
This is my view of the world, right? This is the box that I'm going to put reality in. Anything that doesn't fit in that doesn't exist. I agree with you. I think I'm convinced that there is physics at work here that is simply beyond what human engineering can do. Jack Sarfati has said this. The Agua Dia video in 2013, when I look at that video, I see what appears to be gravitational lensing. And if that's the case, you're already talking about drive systems that are beyond what we can currently engineer. Yeah. So this whole, it can't go that fast, it can't do this, it can't do that. These are things that our systems can't do it. Presumably in 10,000, 100,000, million years, when we reach that level of technology, we will.
Yeah. Great observations on that. It's just, it's a good way to look at it. And I guess it comes down to trying to avoid that constrained view of trying to put, like I said a second ago, putting things in a box and looking at from that, opening our eyes and saying, like you've talked to people from the SCU with regards to this, there is something amazing going on in our skies that, let's say 95% of the stuff is prosaic, but that 5% of the things that we're seeing out there, it's real stuff and it deserves the real attention. If it's not coming from our military, then it needs to come from our science or our academics and everybody else to try and give us the truth of what is going on out there. But it almost seems that even though when you do have scientists like Gary Nolan and others putting information out, the ability to get out the facts to everybody is still kind of constrained with respect to there's this multiple levels of disclosure we're dealing with. We have the secrets that the government agencies are holding down. Then you have a secondary level of secret keepers who are there who are also keeping stuff down. So by the time you get up to the general public, we're getting a filtered view of something that might be real. Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Tim real quick. Did you hear the interview that Admiral Tim Gallaudet did the other day? And he was talking about working with members of the Legacy UAP program behind the scenes to follow what was intended to be the Schumer-Rounds UAP Disclosure Act of 2023 that for the most part was gutted. He said they're going to be moving forward privately for a controlled disclosure that the government should be doing and isn't. They're going to be doing it by working collaboratively together to bring the truth out to the public. I thought that was a profound statement that he made. I was curious what you thought about that.
Yeah, I saw that, and I tell you, there are so many narratives, there's so many messages and stories coming from so many people that it's difficult to know what's real right now, I guess. On the one hand, you have authorities who were saying, it could be potentially foreign adversaries. Then on the other hand, you have, retired authorities, which is what Gallaudet is, who are saying, I'm working with crash retrieval units, and disclosure is moving forward. You've got David Grush, right? And some people are trying to discredit him and say, okay, there's nothing about him that's real. And others have said this is the most possible legitimate person you could imagine, So, I mean, I don't know. I struggle, and I think most of us struggle to know where real is with this. You know what I mean? Like, what is the baseline? Again, the OVNI said that UFOs are real and they are a threat to flight safety. I think that we know that that is the case. I think that the Tic Tac story has been at least mostly established. The Agua video in 2013, for me, that seems firmly established. So, we know that something is going on. I think my intuition has been that this is not human technology. I can't imagine any way that it could be foreign adversaries. Now, that being said, one of the risks that we have is if we write all this off, if we chalk this up to aliens, it would be very easy for Russia to fake aliens to spy on us. So this is another reason to use Arrow, right? We know that something is going on. We have a pretty good idea that it's not human, but we want to keep an eye on it, see what's happening there, and try and understand it, and realize that people are going to try and manipulate this and use it for their own ends.
Right. I guess it comes into understanding that RO has two purposes. One, to try and figure this stuff out. But it clearly is, on the other hand, as a disinformation campaign to try and put as much information out there to throw the American people and the public of the world, for that matter, off the trail of clearly what's going on.
I don't know. It's hard to know how much is intent, how much is disorganization, how much is poor communication. There are so many different competing things going on. And again, you get these, like with Tim Gallaudet the other day, you get these messages that come out there, and it's like, okay, on the surface, it seems really clear. What else is going on there? What motivated him to say that? It's hard to tell. It's a confusing narrative, but I think it is because this is something that ultimately this affects the entire human race.
It is, and I got to tell you, I have one criticism with what Admiral Gallaudet was making about a point. I agree with a collaborative effort with members of the government that have been a part of the legacy UAP program and the cover-up, trying to work behind the scenes publicly, privately, to bring out the truth. But when he said controlled disclosure as a private group, I criticize that because it implies that they're going to have some sort of a throttled or bottleneck release of information. And the way that I see it is, if you're a private group and you're investigating this, whatever evidence you uncover should come out. I don't think you should pick and choose or cherry pick what you're going to release and what you're not, especially if you're working in a private capacity. That's my one criticism about Admiral Gallaudet's point about working on this and bringing it out in a limited way.
Well, now speaking in terms of, and I'm speaking more about the government than his organization, right? But one of the other aspects of this that weighs heavily on this debate, especially now, is public trust in government. 16% right now. That is Pew Research numbers. The moving average for trust in government is 16%. So that's like less than 1 out of every 6 people. And the question they asked them was, do you trust the government to do the right thing most of the time, right? They're not looking for perfection. They're looking for, are you competent, right? And one of the issues that we're struggling with is we're running up like, what was it, $1 trillion every 122 days on the national debt now. I mean, some of these things are weighing heavily on public trust, and that is why it is so low. And that's not just UFOs. This goes back to the 2008 bailouts. It looks like that's when these polls really started to drop. So it's one thing after another, after another, after another, right? The election, I mean, you've got major issues about major concerns about the last election. There are a lot of these things that are unresolved issues, and people don't forget them. And so this UFO issue is kind of a touchstone for something much larger as well, right? It's a big opportunity for organizations like ARROW to win by being honest and forthright. It's also a big opportunity for them to lose. And this ARROW historical report, I view that as, unfortunately, I view that as something that is doing them very much a disservice because they didn't take into account the environment they released it in, I mean, you've got the American public that is paying attention to this is listening to a narrative that seems to be driving forward in one direction. You've got the Grush testimony, then you have the Schumer-Rounds Act, then you have all these things that are pushing in a specific direction. And you have this incredible lack of trust in government. And then suddenly they come out with this report out of nowhere. I believe, didn't they release this on the State of the Union Day, right? Which is kind of a traditional tool, or the day before the State of the Union. It's the traditional tool to get the news media to ignore it, basically. You just put it out there. I mean, could be worse. They could have released it on Super Bowl Sunday, I guess. But the idea there was it was the wrong message at the wrong time. People read it and they're like, what is this? They're trying to whitewash this and sweep it under the rug, right? So I don't know. It's a confusing thing. But again, I think honesty, collaboration, cooperation, those are the big components of it.
It is. I agree. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Admiral Gallaudet is trying to do. Like I told you, the only criticism I have is that if they do uncover facts, if they choose as a private organization to withhold that, I question that. That's my only point. And you're right, as far as the government textbook play, they will release information on a Friday at 4:30 in the afternoon because they know it's the weekend and no one's going to pay attention to it. It's an old trick that they've been using for years and years. Nothing new. Good point, Tim. These are the games they play, and they get away with it. Why do they do it? Because it works and will continue to work. There's pushback that's coming, though. When that report came out of ARROW, everybody was criticizing it. Everybody was not happy with what came out. I think, not that Admiral Gallaudet said this specifically, but I believe he alluded to the possibility that the reason some of the people working within the legacy UAP program are working with him privately is because of that report that was released, the historical report by ARROW. They're so unhappy about it that they're actually now working with him to try to bring out a controlled disclosure. What are your thoughts about when they had the Seoul conference and Colonel Carl Nell was laying out that timeline? If you remember, he had a chart at the Seoul hearing, the conference, and he laid it out from now until past 2030 about how it's going to come out incrementally. I'm sure you saw that, Tim. What are your thoughts about that?
Did. Now, what that, I'm trying to remember if that was a speculative chart or if he was saying that was actually what was going to happen. It's been a while since the Seoul conference, but if I remember right, wasn't he saying this is what it should look like for controlled disclosure, not necessarily that this is the plan that's in place?
Right. That was the point that he was making about that. And they had it all mapped out with a lot of information at different moments in time of what they were expecting to be released. So I don't know if you're familiar with Colonel Carl Nell's history in the government or his involvement for that matter.
Well,
I am.
Oh yeah, I would love. I mean, yeah, help educate me more about it.
Yeah, no, he was firsthand. Well, look, let's start at the beginning. When David Grush testified at the public House Oversight Committee hearing in July 26th of 2023, he wasn't the only firsthand whistleblower that was supposed to be testifying at that hearing. Colonel Carl Nell was supposed to be testifying as well to support the claims that David Grush was making. But at the last minute, he received a lot of pushback from the DOD where he had to withdraw his testimony. And Representative Tim Ventura was criticizing that because at the time, Representative Burchett was supposed to be the one that was the speaker running the House Oversight Committee hearing on UAPs. And at the last minute, they pulled the rug out from under him. But he was the one that knew who the whistleblowers were supposed to be to testify. And I think it was like 4 or 5 that pulled back or withdrew for various reasons, including one of them, from what I remember, was actually from NASA that was going to come and testify to support David Grush's claims. But they all withdrew at the last minute. The last man standing was David Grush. And the reason Carl Nell was going to be testifying is because he had firsthand knowledge of the crash retrieval program that the government has been running. He was the Africa Command. He was in charge of the African Command for the Army. And in the Sudan, there was a crash that occurred, and there was a special forces group that he was in charge of that actually responded to that crash retrieval. And he oversaw the retrieval of the craft for the military. And he was going to testify about that. But he withdrew his testimony at the last minute. And now he's working with the Soul Foundation because they're trying to bring out as much as they can without violating their national security oath and getting thrown in jail. So it's interesting, but there's a interesting history for Colonel Nell. Everybody has been waiting for him to come out and either do an op-ed or speak publicly about what it is that he initially was trying to testify about at that hearing. That's what I know. And Thomas and I have covered this on the show many times, talking about it since those hearings and what Carl Nell's involvement was. So there's more to it than meets the eye, Tim.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I wish that more of this was out there and easier to access. Mike, you have done a ton of digging into the backstories on these. I have not. I mean, I've focused mostly on kind of the Nimitz and stuff like that, but like what you just described about Nell, I didn't know that, so it is helpful to have that. I wish that was more publicly available.
Oh, I agree, but now it goes back to when we started this point about Colonel Nell. At the Soul Foundation, he had that big chart that was laying out the time frame for controlled disclosure, which is interesting because we were just also talking about Admiral Gallaudet, and he used the same phrase, controlled disclosure. So what is it that they know that we don't yet in the public? That's something I find interesting. That's why I asked you what your thoughts are, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I love speculative ideas, right? But so a lot of this depends on the building blocks that you start with. But okay, so we're saying UFOs are real, right? Nobody's mistaken about that. And then we've got this building block that, okay, they're extraterrestrial in nature, right? Or they're non-human, at least. And then it becomes like, okay, and there's some kind of a cover-up in place, and it's not just gross incompetence. So if those three things are true, one of the things that I really wonder about is like, what is it about this that makes it so sensitive and dangerous that you can't reveal it? And the reason I mention that is, so I've done a lot of interviews and I've worked with a lot of scientists relating to nuclear stuff, right? Nuclear reactors, even nuclear weapons. You could get a pretty good idea what's there and how they're built, how they work, all of that kind of stuff from Wikipedia. You know, certain parts of it are secret, and they probably should be. But for the most part, if you want to look up how the bomb works, go to Wikipedia and Google nuclear bomb. They're going to have a play-by-play description of it. Okay, so if this most sensitive big weapon system that we've ever invented is super secret, what is it about UFOs that makes it so dangerous that you can't even really admit that it's there? You know, and for me, the only thing I could think of would be maybe abductions. Maybe abductions are happening. Maybe that's something that can't be controlled, and you know, maybe it would just be, maybe there's a fear that the public panic. I don't know.
I guess
Well-
it comes down to, if you're bringing up the point about abductions and stuff, Tim, it comes down to is how are the people, the general public going, it's bad enough that we're saying they're over our military bases, they're over our military installations, over our crafts out in the sea. But if they come out and they say, yeah, they're coming, they're taking away our people, we have no way to stop them. Some of them are coming back, not all of them. How would the general public react to the truth of what could potentially be going on?
That's one thing I've wondered. The question to ask yourself is, why would you need to keep something so secret? Because again, most of our national security stuff, I mean, our government tends to leak like a sieve, right? If you look hard enough, you can get details for all sorts of stuff that isn't supposed to be public knowledge, but actually is, right? It's the rumor mill. And, people in the Beltway have said that. Washington, D.C. runs on rumors, right? So what is it about that? So if there is some kind of a conspiracy, top-down conspiracy, like people have said, then what is it that makes this different? What is it that takes this to another level, And again, my mind goes to something that, if it got out, would freak people out, basically.
Yeah. If I could, Peter, you've had your hand up for a while, my friend.
Sure. I think Tim just had an interesting point I hadn't really thought about too much. I had previously thought that the main motivation for not bringing this out would be that if the U.S. government admitted that they had, like Mike said, a bolt, right? Then you'd have some international question. Now people are going to say, well, we want to know what this is from. We want to know what the rest of it is from. We want to know what technology this is. They would want to know everything. But the other aspect is that internationally, how do you argue that this belongs to one country? And thinking the international pressure that would bring under and strain allies and also adversary relationships too. And I had thought that was probably the main reason. But when you say, what if abductions are real? Well, then we have to look at the question of, if that was the case, if there was a suspicion that all of these reported abductions that don't have any correlations to any biological things, like sleep paralysis does not make you conjure visions of aliens specifically. It just doesn't. So otherwise, everyone would do that who had sleep paralysis. But if that was the case, and there was even a psychological consciousness abduction, let's say, where your body stayed where it was, whatever, any mild abduction that the government wasn't in control of, that would really break down the idea that the government is there on your side, working to control your safety, your airspace, everything else, and you're giving them close to $1 trillion a year into the military industrial complex. I wonder if you might think that would be a government collapse situation at that point if the people completely lost faith in government on that.
Well, I think this is just my thought. I think the American public is on the edge of losing complete faith in the government. And again, I've done interviews with political scientists who have said, and this is not just our government, but apparently any government, one of the dangers of this is you end up with these military coups in government because people trust the military more than they trust the bureaucracy, right? And so that was a danger. I'm trying to forget his name, but I did an interview with him, and he said that dates back to ancient Rome, right? That's how Julius Caesar ended up in power. People trust the military because they at least are a known value versus the bureaucracy with the shuffling and the paperwork and the games and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. There's a lot there. And I mean, Lord knows I'm no expert in any of this, but when it comes to why would you keep this so secret, that I don't know. It does make me a little paranoid.
Yeah, I understand completely. Let's go to it. Nick, you have your hand up, my friend. Next question.
Yes. Oh, I have a question for Tim actually. Like
Who?
a while ago, like you did an interview with Gary McKinnon. And like, do you believe that there's officers that work for the United States government that are basically not human actually?
The question
You believe
was,
that?
you did the interview with Gary McKinnon, and there was a claim that some of the individuals were not human. Do you believe that?
I struggle with that.
Yeah. As much as I hear about a government agent by the name of Sal because he's a salamander.
Well, I guess my thought is, when you hear about stuff like, okay, and again, when you get into the mythology of this, right, it gets so complicated, but like there are these stories about underground bases that are run by ET and, the whole 9 yards there. But when you get into stuff like that, you get into infrastructure to build, to maintain, to supply. Secrets like that are really hard to maintain. You know what I mean? Like, so whenever I start to hear stories about that, that's kind of where my brain goes, is these big overarching, they walk among us, impersonating us, things like that. Secrets like that are very hard to maintain. So
here's the thing about them walking among us. Honestly, the way I look at it, Tim, if you want to go ahead and see an alien hybrid, we don't need to look anywhere special. Go look in the mirror. There is no direct link from us going back. We haven't found the missing link. We found plenty of dinosaurs that have turned into birds, that we still can't find the apes that turn into humans. You just have to wonder why.
Well, you have an excellent question. And so to kind of spin that on its ear, Kevin Newth worked on the Drake equation, and he was trying to flip that around and look at it from a SETI perspective. And his idea, it doesn't have to be perfect, but his idea was, okay, if you're an alien race and you start out here and you're exploring the galaxy, how long before you're likely to find Earth? And the numbers that he came up with were basically saying, if they arrived here, they've been here hundreds of thousands of years, maybe longer, So then that does raise questions. If they've been here that long, who knows? Maybe
if they've been here a couple 100,000 years, that ties back to the stories from the Sumerians.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Matt Ramone, you have your hand up, my friend.
Yeah, there's just two parts to this, really.
Uh-oh.
I think with the abduction side of it, too, there's not too much of people even talking about missing children or missing people anymore. I mean, you used to have milk cartons with the missing person on the side of it, and that's kind of gone away. So the government's really not talking about much of that. But I just want to say I've appreciated hearing you on the show tonight. I'm really glad that you stopped in.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate you guys having me on. I wish I had a more coherent message. I mean, I would say that the biggest interest area for me is really the intersectionality. That's my word of the year. Intersectionality between SETI, UAP, artificial intelligence, and all of these areas. And my hope is that by looking at it from the 21st century, that we can understand some of these problems that have been intractable in the past, And I mean, I'm really not, everybody likes to complain about the government. I think that's our national pastime, right? That's why we're Americans and not British. But by the same token, I'm not the world's biggest critic of the government. I tend to think that they're doing the best they can. They're just between this persistent rock and a hard place. And, it's up to us. It's up to us to make the difference. But the thing that I do hope is that we can use stuff like, again, like astrobiology, right? Like exoplanets, emerging knowledge of DNA and how life evolves and things like that. We can use these new technologies, new science, and new perspectives, and then apply these to this and maybe understand it in a better way. So that's my big picture approach, I guess.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Great.
Peter's had his hand up, Thomas.
I was just about to call on him. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
So
Tim,
just really quick here, Peter. So if people don't know, I've had another one of my migraines starting to kick in. I've medicated for it. I'm just kind of kicking back. I've asked Mike a little bit to help out a little bit more. Great. We've got some questions coming from the back. So let's just let this go on. Peter, go ahead, my friend.
absolutely, Thomas. Just, relax your shoulders and sit back there.
There we go.
We'll do what we can here.
Leave the driving to us.
That's
Right,
what I'm
Peter?
doing, my friend.
Go ahead,
So,
Peter.
so Tim, I was kind of thinking about this, the study of UAP and relating it to other things. And, I might say that it would be like a shark biologist studying sharks and seeing a really big bite radius of sharks and saying, well, they want to say that this is probably a new species of shark, but all the shark species, the biggest ones, are all classified by the government, right? So they can't say whether it's a new shark species or not, or whether it's something else entirely. And I think we kind of are running into that situation with this technology and performance envelope. We see these things and record on data, radar too, and they are exceeding what we're told we have. And if we would just be released this information, then we'd be able to compare what are these doing and what is our best technology doing. So it seems like this would be an easily solvable question if we were allowed to get this information. But, they're not allowing this information out. So I wonder too, if part of the reason these aren't being released is, one, of course, they don't want, government doesn't want to release how far their technology has gone. But two, do you think it would be to the advantage of government to allow adversaries to think that these are U.S. products by not saying they aren't, so that some of the other adversaries think that the U.S. is a lot further ahead than they are, and they have a really good deterrent weapon, something like the nuclear program was supposed to be before other programs became nuclear too?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's an excellent point. Like, why would you mislead? Basically, what you're saying is let foreign powers, foreign adversaries believe that we have more and better weapons than we actually do. There is every reason in the world for that, and that's probably something that's taken into account, right? In terms of, hey, we say nothing about this because then they'll come to their own conclusions, and if they're risk averse, like we suspect they probably are, they're going to at least think, hey, maybe they have some kind of super weapons along these lines. And the reverse is also true, right? You've got China and Russia making all these announcements about hypersonics and the whole 9 yards. And, some of that is true. Most of it is maybe true, but I'm sure that they are playing up their defense capabilities to give us pause, in the same way that we do for ours. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets a little frustrating to know that we probably could have answers on this really quickly if we were just allowed to know, hey, military industrial complex, where are you on flight performance? And then we can compare this and we can see definitively, okay, well, this is not within a realm.
Say I would tell you point blank. So the only way you could the only way you can do like the 50G acceleration and turns and even stuff like transmedium stuff, right? I mean, where you're going hundreds of miles an hour and you dip into the water and then dip back out. There's no human technology that can do that. That's just a point blank no in terms of human technology. We do not have anything like that. Now, people have pushed back and said, well, Bob Lazar said this and the TR-3B that. And okay, if we have some kind of reverse engineering, right, this goes back to the Schumer Rounds Act. But in terms of stuff we've developed ourselves, we don't have that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that and that assessment on multiple fronts, including what you just said. You know, water's 1,000 times denser than air. So to go into water at speed and then come back out and have a smooth transition the way that Aguadilla object did, I don't see what possible technology we might have that can reproduce that. And I think that video gets dismissed a lot, and it shouldn't by a lot of the public, but most of the public hasn't even seen that video and isn't even aware of it. And I think there's a question here of how many of us are not going to go along with the flow and say, yes, we're aware these things have high technology, and how many of the general population they can just kind of placate to take the pressure off so they don't have to release this to us.
Well, you can get an idea in terms of the defense industry too. And this is something that, again, I've done a lot of interviews and I've done a lot of coverage of this. You know, you can get a really good idea where things are at by looking at where people are putting their money, where the private defense contractors are focusing their efforts, what other countries are doing and things like that. In terms of, you know, where is the technology right now? I think that the Ukraine war was a wake-up call in terms of drones and automation. And so what I've been seeing is this big push towards like the replicator program, right? Kathleen Hicks announced that. This idea towards smaller, lighter, cheaper, faster, disposable weapon systems, swarms that work together, AI systems that can make decisions and work autonomously, you know, and these are things that kind of came out of Ukraine. I mean, you're seeing quadcopters disable aircraft there. You're seeing quadcopters dropping bombs and killing soldiers. All of a sudden, stuff that they didn't take seriously, they're looking at and going, wait a minute, this is an actual thing. We need to work on this. So that's where I see our defense industry, you know. I don't see any hints of this TR-3B being real. I could be mistaken. That's entirely possible. But, you know, usually you can get kind of a feel for where things are going by what's making headlines in that industry. And right now, that's primarily drones, automation, AI, things along those lines.
Yeah, great point. I know we've got two more hands up there. I think Andy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Andy is next.
Joining us from the United Kingdom, we have our dear friend Andy, also known as Yellow Tommy Tanker. Welcome, Andy.
Hi, hi Tim. So I'm from the United Kingdom. I'm the UK contingent here. You talked a bit earlier. I wasn't able to get in. I was still at work. About adversarial technology. You know, where they say, oh, it could be China, it could be Russia, it could be Iran. That's a laugh. Certainly for Iran.
That laugh came from Kirsten Gillibrand. She's the only schmuck who said blaming it on Iran, and everyone would bring it up and are like, Iran? No way.
Unfortunately, they've got to use a lot of our UK technology for their drones.
Well, and Iran is making this. So Iran is making the drones, or at least has been making the drones that Russia is using, right? So that could be why she's.
Yeah. So I I've brought it up on the show before, you know, as a member of the United Kingdom, you know, if it was adversarial technology flying over the States, I would be extremely worried for you guys, you know, for the amount of money your government and your military are spending, trillions and trillions, you know, for adversaries to be able to fly.
I mean, but it's not just nuclear power plants. There was a recent incident that was taking place over Langley Air Force Base. And this is the place where all the spooks from the CIA and the Army and other areas are flying in or out of. Trust me, I've got stories about people I can't talk about who have been seen in that airport. But needless to say, we have these incidents going on, and these things are moving at an altitude. They're moving at a speed that is beyond our ability to stop them. So we do have to wonder, are these things just regular drones, or are they something else? Because you also have to take a look at all the drones we had going over the far Midwest, more of the western United States, where you had them over Colorado, over Wyoming, over North Dakota, South Dakota, etc. We had all of those drone sightings that were going on, and these drones were up in the air for hours and hours, which well exceeded the capabilities of even the military's best drones at the time. So we could say sometimes, yes, it's a drone, but some of the flight characteristics and see what we have going on from these drones that are operating within the United States without impunity, Tim, that's the real head scratcher, saying, okay, is it the Chinese who are in here and they've got some great new technology and they're using it on the American shores without impunity, or is it something bigger? What do you think?
Well, you're making a good point. I mean, so in terms of any kind of quadcopter drone, I've seen a couple of different types. Your battery powered ones that we're all familiar with, you've got what, about a half an hour flight time with those, right?
Yeah.
Now, in that half an hour, and I'm sure you guys have seen those Chinese light shows, you can do amazing things. I mean, they
now,
have
remember
those
the Chinese light shows that you've seen? Those are all played back at 10 times of regular speed. And there's a lot of small ones that are going on. But the ones we had over the Midwest off in the western United States, those things were huge and they were silent. So it's not like they were being powered by conventional engines.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you also have drones like the Reaper and the Predator and stuff, but those are essentially light aircraft, right?
Yeah.
And understanding is the Iranian drone that the Russians are using, that kamikaze drone, is essentially kind of a light aircraft.
So it's a small, ultralight little aircraft that has a prop in the back that looks no different. The only thing that's missing out of it is the controls for the guys who are flying it on the old abandoned airfield on the weekends.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, again, in terms of defense technology, what's out there, this goes back several years, but I had a friend, one of my contacts, who flew out of Area 51, and I'm trying to remember what he was. I think he was an F-16 pilot or something. But and I asked him, I said, well, what kind of stuff is out there? And he's like, obviously I can't tell you, but he's like, he stopped and thought about it for a minute. He's like, you know what? He's like, Tim, you could guess. And I said, okay, probably drones and experimental engines and stuff. And he's like, yep, there you go. So, I mean, now who knows? One of the problems is, and this goes back to the trust in government, is there has been this claim that, okay, Bob Lazar brought all the heat to Area 51. So, they moved all the good stuff someplace else, right? Like some people said North Dakota or Montana or something like that. So again, this goes to it. If this deck has been reshuffled like this, and I know that UFO buffs have gone to some of these different locations looking for it, but then this goes to this larger question of trust, right? And again, that trust is at 16% for a reason. It is because we are struggling to accept what we've been told. And I think UFOs, that's not the whole story, but I think that that's part of it. And I think that's part of why this Arrow report was so poorly received. They didn't take into account the environment they were releasing that into.
Great points, absolutely. Nick, you have your hand up, my friend.
Yes. Like Tim, I have a question for you. Do you believe that the United, you or the public could handle, like a hypothetical agreements between the United States government and aliens for humans? How would you react to it? And how do you think the public would react to it?
So how would we react to agreements between the government? Are you talking about like those
supposedly Eisenhower back in the 50s made a deal with the ETs about a bunch of different stuff that were not included within, and I think that's kind of what Nick is talking about with regards to if there were agreements and there were rights that were given from the U.S. government, potentially the non-human intelligence, in exchange for technology. Sure, go ahead, take so many of our citizens. We don't care. We want the technology because we want it for war.
Well, I mean, that's not legal to begin with, right? I mean, that's not something the president can do, from what I understand. But even if the president could do it, I think that goes far beyond the scope of, of something like that. I mean, my thought would be that I believe that this is an issue that affects every single member of the human race. every single member of the American public, obviously. And if any kind of negotiations or treaties are going to happen, this is something that should involve the entire legislature, and probably the public should have a voice in what's going on, you know? So this whole idea of secret treaties and stuff, I mean, I don't think that that falls within the scope of presidential powers. And if it did, it would certainly be outside of the scope of what those powers were provided for.
We could probably say, it's probably safe to say, we have secret treaties with the Five Eyes. We have secret treaties with many different governments around the world. So if we have these secret treaties with all these different, or classified treaties as you'd call them, with these different organizations, it would make sense that if we were making deals with the non-human intelligence for tech, because the way you look at it, nothing ever comes for free. There's always a cost associated with it, no matter what.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like, for me, this would be a thought experiment, but substitute ET for Second Coming of Christ, right? And then trying to run through some of these scenarios, except instead of aliens, it's, you know, Second Coming of Christ. Yeah, we grabbed him, we threw him down in a cellar. You know, no one's ever going to see him. No one's going to know, you know? I mean, when you start to run through some of that, it's like, well, wait a minute. These are things that matter to every single human being, right? Maybe we don't need to know the details. Maybe there are aspects of this that are very compartmentalized in national security. But again, going back to what Lester had described, maybe they could characterize some of that, you know, like, oh, by the way, you know, we have a strong belief that maybe they're not from around here, you know? So, you know, I mean,
a bunch of different ways you could possibly look at it. That's a fact. Peter, you have your hand up, my friend.
You know, it occurs to me also that given the scenario that the government does not know what these are, even seriously acknowledging that they don't know what these are might provoke the question from the population, how is it that we're spending $876 billion a year out of our pockets for the military-industrial complex, and things can fly over our airspace, and you guys cannot know what they are? And that might provoke an audit, a serious audit that they can't back down from, and they'd have to come up with explaining where that $21 trillion is that's currently missing through all the Pentagon audits. And they may have a big financial motivation.
Peter, really quick, hasn't the Pentagon failed their last 6 audits in a row?
They failed. They have 100% score on failing audits. So, yeah, but I mean, what would they do if they said, hey, we have these things flying over the airspace? One, you can't keep the airspace safe. And two, where's all the money going? And think about the huge financial incentive there is in that and keeping that quiet. And, you know, just like maybe a Boeing whistleblower might, shoot himself and throw himself out of the back of an airplane in that order. You know, things like that happen. So, I wonder if, how much of this do you go back, Tim, between kind of more prosaic explanations for this and kind of the more wild explanations for this? And do you go back and forth and find yourself kind of returning in kind of a cycle, like a pendulum back and forth between these, or have you kind of worked into a set in where you think?
Even just discussing it on this show, you know, and maybe, I don't know. I mean, other people don't admit to being ignorant as often as I do. I've noticed that. I'm more open about being lost than other folks are. But even discussing it on this show, you know, I go back and forth in my head on this, you know. This says that it could be some kind of a conspiratorial, we're trying to hide the truth. This says that maybe it's just incompetence, or maybe lack of knowledge, or maybe they think they're telling the truth and just missing things, right? But, you know, when you look at all of these different possibilities, probably most of the public is in the same boat. And at the end of the day, I mean, I was just thinking when you were posing that question, I was like, this makes my brain hurt. But then after that, there's this thing of, I don't trust any of this. And that is the dangerous part, right? It's when you reach that point where you're like, it doesn't matter what they say, right? Their lips are moving, therefore they're lying. That's the part that I think Americans are getting to. And that is the truly dangerous part for Aero, right? And so when you look at not just Congress, but the executive branch and these other things, there's this, well, we can placate this, we can placate that, we can do the other thing. I do not know. I think past a certain point, people are just going to become totally disconnected from the whole thing and say, we're going to believe what we're going to believe, and the rest of this stuff is crap, And again, you look at what's going on in other aspects of this government, I think the American public's getting there. And so, I'm just Joe Average in terms of that, but I kind of feel the same way. It's like I'm losing faith, It feels like, I would say, in terms of, again, the government is not a monolithic entity. It is a collection of different agencies, a collection of different organizations that work together. But it feels like they're incapable of being honest. It feels like that is something they're not capable of. I'm not sure if there is an organization out there in the United States government that is able to be fully open and honest.
You think it's incapable by design, meaning that's how they were put together to where they never could go ahead and be that honest?
No, I think a lot of it is just passing the buck. I think a lot of it is again, I got into the real estate industry on the software side during the 2008 crisis. And I read the report on that crisis and the bailouts and all the rest of it. And one of the things that got America into that was the financial crooks that were doing it had this idea of I'll be gone, you'll be gone. And you see that in government too, right? You've got this periodic turnover. The administration comes, the administration goes. So it's like, we're going to kick the can down the road. We don't have to deal with it. We don't have to be honest, because in 4 years, somebody else will have to,
Yeah. Great points. Back to you, Mike.
Yeah, those are all great points.
Yeah.
And I want to add something. Tim, as far as you said you did reading on the 2008 crisis.
Yeah.
Well, okay. That was a parting gift, that crisis, when Clinton left office. He removed the Dodd-Frank Act, which prevented these large banks and financial institutions from gambling with their depositors' money, which once Dodd-Frank was removed, they were able to do so at will, which is what led to the 2008 crash and crisis that we had to deal with. But on this subject, you made a point earlier that I want to touch back on real quick. I understand the average person looks at this as an average Joe with limited knowledge and understanding, but that's not necessarily the case for me. With my law enforcement background and my being trained in investigative tactics and techniques, I look at it slightly differently. I was trained to look at the evidence, not form an opinion, but follow the evidence, regardless if I agree with it or I don't, wherever it may lead. And I believe that you were about to make a point that the observable facts that we have documented with multiple sensor arrays, going all the way back to the Nimitz case with the Tic Tac, it's not a question of, is it a new form of technology? Is it a hypersonic missile? Is it a hypersonic aircraft? Is it a hypersonic drone? This goes way beyond that. What we're talking about, and I believe you were about to make that point, is that what we're able to observe from an evidentiary perspective is that this is exhibiting unknown physics.
Yeah.
Not a new form of technology. This is unknown physics that are being displayed plain as day. There's no escaping that fact. And that's what pops out clear as day to me when I look at these events and what we're talking about now. It's obvious that you can't put a prosaic definition on this, because at face value, it's obvious to a layman that this is something exhibiting unknown physics. technology that is beyond our scope or even our imagination to a large degree.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree with you, Mike. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, because this is how I deal with it. This is how I see it. And this is plain as day and obvious to me. And I don't understand when Kirkpatrick and Arrow are trying to give a prosaic explanation to what we are well aware of is anything but prosaic. It's not just a question of are they lying, it's insulting our intelligence when they make statements like that. That's what's rubbing everybody the wrong way, I believe.
I think I think that's a fair statement. I think that's a fair statement. Some of the things, especially when they talk about, the foreign adversary, yes, there's definitely an element to it is insulting our intelligence, and the same would apply to this. And I can't remember the exact hearing it was, but I do recall a defense official speaking at one of the UFO hearings, and he appeared woefully ignorant about what a UFO should be and does and all that. I'm like, wait a minute. Again, if you're an American and you grow up in our culture, you should have a pretty good idea what a UFO is. Now, it doesn't mean that we're dealing with those, right? But like, if somebody says UFO, we know what's going to come into your head, right? It's a little, tin can with, little gray or green men in it. I mean, Marvin the Martian, right? This stuff has been around longer than any of us have been alive. So these are themes that are just incredibly part of our culture. So that when you see the defense officials come on and they're like, UFO, well, I'll have to look up what that might possibly mean, like, yeah, that is a little insulting.
And that's, I think, what is one of the leading reasons why the average person and the public, the population as a whole, they're listening to these messages coming out of government agencies and administrations. And they're not just, well, is it true or not? Is it fact or fiction? They're insulted. They're getting their intelligence directly insulted, and they know it. So this goes beyond a prosaic explanation or a foreign adversary. The average person sees what has been reported and what's shown to be evidence that we can see in the public. Go on YouTube. You'll see videos of military engaging with objects that it defies known physics and defies a prosaic explanation. So people at that point are divided. They lose faith in government. They lose faith in being protected by the government. And it's also highly insulting that if we look at the nuts and bolts of this, yeah, the government is spending our hard-earned taxpayer money on whatever they're covering up or researching or involved in. So we have the right as citizens to pay for all of this, but we don't have the right to know anything about it. That's another point that people are up in arms about.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Tim?
I think that this goes, well, so Ross Coulthart the other day called this a constitutional crisis. And I like those words. And for me, yeah, what he's where he's driving at with this, and this is, UFOs are not the only issue that's like this, right? But
right,
it's like you have to think back to what America was founded on and about, I mean, and it's like, is this what we want? Is this what we want to live in? And that's the part that really troubles me. And so when people say, well, the country is struggling with this, and things are falling apart, and it's like, well, is that a surprise? Because I'm not sure if we're living in the system that our forefathers intended us to live in.
The way that Danny Sheehan explained this a while ago is that the United States government, at least how I interpreted what he described a while ago, as of 1947, the United States of America as we know it ceased to exist. And that point in time, we were left with the national security state of America, to where a lot of our rights and the way our democracy was run with secret meetings and backroom deals was taken away with the introduction of the National Security Act. Now, because of that, that's kind of one of the problems that has gotten us to where we're at now. And if you want to call it a constitutional crisis, Danny Sheen has attested, I believe you've heard about this before, Mike, that it's illegal and it's something that needs to be challenged. And it's something that about a year and a half ago, Danny was talking about working with a group of lawyers of challenging that. And I believe that effort may still be going on, Mike.
I believe you're right, Thomas. But listen, let's look at it at face value. Danny Sheehan is a constitutional attorney by trade.
Yeah.
And the points that he was making is that the National Security Act, which the executive branch of our government has been hiding behind and preventing anybody from getting direct information from the public. No FOIA. They're able to hide as a matter of national security. Look, we've talked about this on the show at length and in detail. There are three branches of the government that our forefathers had set up for a reason. And that reason is that they would be able to break a tie and not allow one branch to rule over all the other branches. They have the judicial, which is the Supreme Court. They have the legislative, which is the Congress. And they have the executive branch, which is the military, the IC, and the president. The problem, once they initiated the 1947 National Security Act, is that if you have a dispute between the executive branch and the legislative, and then it goes up to the judicial with the Supreme Court, the one exception to that is that if they're going to hear a case or rule on something that is deemed a matter of national security, the judicial doesn't have the authority to rule on it. It's exempt.
And anything that comes up
Danny,
with regarding national security, the judicial holds their hands up and says, well, whatever you guys say.
right. And Danny wants to challenge that because, in plain English, it's absolutely unconstitutional, without a doubt, because it's giving ultimate authority of a dictatorship and an oligarchy over what is supposed to be the Republic of the United States and a democracy. But that one law that was passed seems to have removed any semblance of a true democracy. And he wanted to challenge that. And I believe there are machinations that he's involved in behind the scenes through the New Paradigm Institute to try to accomplish that.
You know, there are some complicating factors too. And again, I think one of the things that probably should be explored more and discussed more are the sociocultural factors that are involved with this. I mean, there are a lot, right? We've got 75 years of it, and we have a lot of things moving forward in society and culture right now, like AI and things like that. Again, the discovery of exoplanets, you know, big leaps forward in science and technology all over the place that potentially impact this. And they also change the social cultural factors and expectations that we have. But Mike, when you were just talking, one of the things that popped into my mind was this. I have friends all over the world, and I'm sure you guys do too, right? By running a podcast, the people who listen to your podcast, probably mostly in the United States, but they're spread out all over the place. So I have a friend, young lady in Russia who's an English teacher, and I helped her do a podcast last month about teaching English to Russian people, right? You know, I have other friends who were in Dubai. I have friends who are in South Africa. I have friends, you know, and they all have varying levels of interest in this. But one of the things that gets me too is their understanding of American culture, because we export our culture globally, right? This is their issue as much as it is ours. And so it's interesting because when you get into these American constitutional things, yes, it is ours. It's our government. It's ours that we broke and ours to fix. But then at the same time, there's this, and I tend to forget this as an American, the rest of the world is watching and they also view this as their issue. They want to know, right? It's not they don't have representation the same way that we theoretically do. But, you know, people in Europe, they want to know just as much as people here do, you know? So again, this is a global issue. It affects all of us. And I think because of the way things have evolved and the way society is changing, we forget that it is global in nature, you know, but we're on a world stage with this.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. And listen, I know that your audience, you have international members of your audience, And I know that because we too have international members in our audience from all around the world. And the reason that they come and follow our shows is because they don't have, and Andy could speak about this, there is not a wealth of information on this topic or subject in their respective countries like there is here in the United States. At least we can come on and we could talk about this. But when you leave outside of the US, not so much. It's a difference. And Andy comes on and speaks about all the time that he wishes in his country in England that they would be talking more about this. They're not. So we have people from all over the world that are coming as a global audience because they want this information. And it goes to the point you were just making, I believe, Tim, that this isn't an issue about one country. This is, if there is an advanced civilization here on Earth with us, then the people of this planet, the human race, has the right to know. Everybody.
Yeah.
Right, Tim? That was the point?
Everybody, yeah. And it's, I think this is one of those, again, I liken this to the importance of, you could say this is almost like the second coming of Christ, right? This is one of those, you know, if Jesus shows up, it's not going to be something only a few people should know about. This should be something that everyone should know about. We should all have basically the same level of knowledge. And then guess what? We're going to have some big questions we got to answer for ourselves, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And listen, speaking of religion, we spoke about this, Tim, privately, you and I. The Vatican has now made a new announcement that they are open to welcoming their brothers and sisters from space into our family, into our religion. God accepts all creatures, right? You remember?
I don't think I've seen that, but I would love to see that. I think that's a wonderful approach and a wonderful vision, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that people have to embrace the Catholic tradition or embrace the Vatican or anything like that, but it's about reaching out, you know, and that, I mean, again, at 48, that's one of the things that I'm finding that's more important than anything is working together, you know, and collaborating, you know.
Oh, no, I agree. And from what I recall of the conversation, I also mentioned to you that Grush had publicly spoken at the hearing and stated that back in 1933 in Magenta, Italy, when Mussolini was in charge of the country before the Second World War, that the Vatican had reached out to the U.S. government. It was the OSS back then, to help the U.S. to recover that crash, that craft. And the Vatican was strategically involved in dealing with that, which means they have knowledge going back almost 100 years about the existence of a non-human technology and craft. So they're not in the dark when they make statements like this. It's an educated statement based on the facts that's part of their history, which I find truly amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and again, you take this back to Grush, and that for me, I that's still all hanging out there in the air, isn't it? I mean, it is truly confusing. You know, it's like what is going on here with the Grush story? Because, you know, I mean, I guess they've had meetings. There was another meeting with Skiffs, right? But
yes,
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to keep track of where that's at. He has made these big statements about airtight claims, lots of witnesses with clearances who were supposed to know. You know, he said, you know, we have downed craft. What he's described as biologics. You know, he did the congressional hearings. He's done some podcasts where he didn't really reveal that much more because he can't. And then you've got all this stuff that's sitting in government waiting. I don't know what it's waiting for. I mean,
yeah,
you know, I'm lost on
bureaucratic red tape. Yeah, go listen. It's not just you, my friend. We're all lost with all of this.
Yeah,
it's not just you.
Talking about
and Peter.
Yeah, we've got three
Peter's
people with their hands up. I want to try and get this clear before we call this tonight. We have three last people with their hands up: Peter, Andy, and then Matt. Peter, take it, my friend.
Yeah, I was just going back to what Mike
said too about the reports that were released by Arrow and by the government. One of the things that kind of struck me from it was not just the conclusions, but it seemed to me that there was a tone. There was a dismissive tone from those reports, and even in the body language during some testimonies from some personnel. You can just kind of see in the body language that there's just kind of this dismissive, standoffish tone with it. And I think that might have been part of what was aggravating to people. It was to me. But I'm kind of struck by the curious lack of curiosity by some of these people. This is a fairly interesting subject, and it seems that some people have a very curious lack of curiosity. I wonder why that is. That's one thing. And the second thing, maybe they know more than they're letting on. That's why they're not so curious about it. But the other thing I was wondering about, to go along with tone, is that you do an excellent podcast. I think for what you do, I think you've got the best podcast around for your kind of technological interviewing and interviewing on a scientific level out there on UFO. I really like your podcast. But I was wondering, what you've seen as far as the public tone, because in your approach with talking about this, you don't ask permission before talking about it. What I mean by that is you just matter-of-factly talk about this, like, well, we're going to talk about this potential propulsion, we're going to talk about this potential aspect of this. And you don't ask permission and saying, well, is this real? I'm going to try and convince you that this is real first, and then see if we can get permission that way. And if there's good reason to talk about this, and then talk about it. You just talk about it like you're talking about a new species of octopus or whatever that you might have found. So I'd be really interested to know kind of what your tone is there and what your sense is of the public tone shifts that you've seen through this issue.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not completely following the way you're framing. Could you reframe the question?
Sure. Yeah, there was kind of a lot in there, but I was just wondering what the general public tone from the public as far as the UFO issue over the recent years. We've had a lot of new things come in. We've had congressional hearings. We've had some whistleblowers come out. We've had a lot of activity on this, and I was just wondering what you have seen yourself with a shift in tone from the public and people that you deal with on the UFO issue, and how they're talking to you about it, and if you've noticed a tone change in the public in general.
So in other words, are you seeing people being more accepting and open to this, or are they kind of where they were, Tim?
Yeah, well, I would say in terms of accepting and open, the feedback that I'm consistently getting, like from my audience, from people I talk to, is for anyone who cares about it, because I've still met a lot of people who just don't know. They're not following it, which to me is surprising because it's made, headlines around the world. But like I every now and then I bump into someone, and I don't talk about it that much, but when it comes up, they'll be like, oh, UFOs? I'm like, you haven't been following this? You missed the hearings? So there's a large cohort of people in the population who just don't know. But for those who are following it, I guess what I'm seeing is people aren't surprised. It's one of those things. You know what I mean? There's not an amount of the response has not been like UFOs are real. I do that. The rest of the people that I meet are just like, yeah, duh. They're like smack me upside the head. Tim, you should have figured this out years ago. Like, well, I believed what they said. You're like, well, that's your first mistake. So there's that, and then I think the other big shift has been with the Grush testimony, right? Because we were all kind of playing along. It was that wink, wink, nod, nod, foreign adversary. We don't know what this could possibly be, and so when his stuff went public, I think that changed. And again, there are a lot of people who aren't following this at all, but for those who are, I think that those were that was a big pivot. And it confused a lot of things. So I'm not sure if it was the right pivot at the right time, but it is what it is.
All we can do is keep on trying and move things forward, Tim.
Yeah, but I haven't seen a lot of people who are surprised. What I've seen for the most part is people are just kind of like duh, everybody knew this already. So
Absolutely. Great question. Andy, do you, and then to Matt to wrap it up.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Mike was saying about, those of us who are not in the States. Yeah, I think you're very fortunate that it is talked about more openly. Here in the UK, my only real experience of being, of anything to do with UFOs before I came across this podcast was we used to have an amazing magazine back in the 90s, UFO magazine. This was edited by one guy, unfortunately passed away, that folded, that was it. And then 2-3 years ago, I was going down a rabbit hole on YouTube, as you do, and somehow this podcast popped up. And I was a viewer for a very long time, and then I started coming in about 1.5 years ago. But, even talking about it, there's a handful of people where I work, and I work on, over a couple of shifts, 200 or 300 people. Maybe 2 or 3 people I talk about this subject to, and 2 of them are experiencers. In fact, one of them came up and told me about a sighting they had outside of my workplace last week. But other than that, I don't talk about it really. None of my family, nobody. This has been a gateway to a heck of a lot of information I would never ever have been able to get.
Well, in the UK, you also have Vinny Adams, right? And I really, Vinny, he seems like he's working really hard to try and understand things and get the word out. And then like the old Project Green Glow guys, and this is more on the propulsion side of things, right? But you had Rob Chambers, and Rob is still out there. He's really into this. He worked with Ron Evans, and Ron Evans, everybody knows from Green Glow, right? And so, they are also, they're still around. They're still doing things. Then you have Nick Cook, right, who wrote The Hunt for Zero Point, and he's not UFO focused, but he's been kind of moving in that direction more lately. So there are a lot of, really pivotal figures, I guess, in the UK,
But we had back in the day, we had Tim Good, who was, phenomenal books he wrote. Great fan of his. I was fortunate to meet him at a convention once. But you've got you've got people like Chris Sharp, about now, but it's only through this show that I've heard of half of these people. I would never have heard of Christopher Sharp at all.
And I think part of the problem that you're talking about, Andy, really comes from the UK government. Well, they still won't discuss anything or bring anything out because due to the high level of security classification, Parliament is pretty much locked down on no matter what the military is trying to do.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your insight, Andy. Matt, last question for the night. Go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, and one of the things that was brought up by you, Tim, is that you're looking at the humanitarian side of things as far as just us as humans, not just countries. And one of the things that I really wanted to get to is if there is an issue and there is some sort of preparedness that we as humans have to know about these things for our own safety or anything like that. Like, I feel that the government should be responsible enough. They tell you, hey, duck and cover your head during a tornado, and I know it's been brought up in the back channel a lot about people wondering as to what they should do, what kind of things that they need to look for and watch out for. And I don't think it gets talked about too much. I mean, a lot of people say, oh yeah, there's aliens. I believe in them, and they see them and they understand them. And we've kind of been taught that throughout movies and things like that, little hints. So it's not like that analytical shock, but it's just right now. I think that if we had any idea of how to be prepared and what to do in a chance of us to have some sort of survival, if something really went down, I think the government should be responsible. All governments should be responsible to at least inform us on something.
Yeah, well, my gut feeling is that I'm an optimist, especially when it comes to life elsewhere in the universe. other forms of intelligent life on the planet. I mean, there are always negative possibilities with anything, but I'm genuinely optimistic. I mean, you can look at Carl Sagan's pale blue dot speech that's out there, or that scene from Contact with Jodie Foster. I think that as the human species grows and evolves, I think we're on the edge of something that is larger, more wonderful, more beautiful, and profound than any of us could have possibly imagined, And I think the UAP phenomena is probably part of this. This is part of this growth and development phase. So I'm not, I'm not pessimistic overall. But again, what you're driving to there, and I think this whole idea about the unknown in terms of the government is, there shouldn't be an unknown in terms of the government. You know what I mean? This is like Caesar's wife is beyond reproach, right? The whole idea is that we should not be in a position to wonder if the government is lying to us. That should not be the case in the United States. We should be able to say, no, they would never lie to us. And this goes back to, I remember the first instance that I heard of in my own family was the Gary Powers spy plane with my mother when she was a young girl. And she was telling me that when she was a girl, back when they were doing duck and cover raids in the nuclear era and all that, when the Gary Powers thing happened, the reaction of her parents was, well, the president would never lie. So obviously there's a mistake, And when you look at where trust is now, right? That is not the world that we live in at this point. And so for me, that's ultimately where this drives back to. I think that UAP and UFOs, it's its issue in its own way, but it also speaks to something a lot larger.
Yeah, and it almost seems like the last person that we could trust these days are the words coming out of the president of the United States. Unfortunately, there's so many things that they say they're just twisted around, and it's all a lot of political posturing versus talking from the heart and talking from truth. Now, talking from my heart, Tim, it's been a phenomenal 2 hours already hanging out with you, talking to you tonight. I know we're going to talk about more stuff about APEC and other things, but we just kind of got into this conversation. It's been phenomenal, my friend. For once, the interviewer gets interviewed.
Well, and thank you for having me on. I wish I could speak more cogently and coherently. I'm not sure if I helped that much.
Oh no, you were absolutely wonderful, my friend. You pulled this off. What do you think, Mike?
Oh my God, Tim! The audience was hanging on every part of this conversation. You pulled it off perfectly. It was a pleasure, and I could prove it to you. The 2 hours that Thomas just mentioned, it doesn't feel anywhere near like 2 hours. It flew by really quickly. That speaks for itself.
Yeah, it's definitely an honor to be able to, just help share, I guess. And, again, if you guys want to have me back on in the future, let me know.
Absolutely. Can't wait for future collaborations, having you on and just covering some of your stuff. As we talked about before the show, we're going to start covering some of your interviews on a regular thing here going on Disclosure tonight. Hopefully get some more people interested in your content. More importantly, bringing some of your great content to our audience. That's phenomenal, my friend. It's wonderful having you as a trusted, if you want to call a media partner here with Disclosure tonight. On that note, if I could, let me go ahead and see what I can do. Hang out for a second here, Tim. I think the people are in the back are going to want to talk to you after the show. On that note, I want to go ahead and thank, where's my soundboard? There it is. No, it isn't. There it is over there.
Well, have a nice weekend, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Hang out here. We're almost done here. Yeah, thank you for myself. Have a good weekend. We got a great show coming up tomorrow. On that note, I want to go ahead and thank everybody for wonderful super chats here today. That includes the wonderful Brian Pemble, Anthony Mack after death once, and Anthony Mack after death twice. Thank you for your ongoing love and support of Disclosure tonight. More importantly, I want to thank our guest, Tim Ventura. Thanks for coming out tonight, Tim. We appreciate you being here. Mike, thanks for being there, and also everyone in the back crew. What a great time to hang out with a good friend.
Absolutely. A good friend and a colleague.
Yes.
We appreciate it, Tim. We have an open door policy for you. You're welcome anytime you have available, my friend. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
Well, and thank you as well. So again, I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and we'll all just have to stay tuned, right?
Absolutely. And as we usually say at the end of every one of our broadcasts of Disclosure tonight, but wait, Matt Ramon, thank you for that last minute super chat. Eyes open, no fear, be safe, everyone. But absolutely, we'll catch you on the flip side. See you, everyone, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific. We have Elizondo Franco from the Disclosure Revolution to talk about his event that he just had in New York. What an amazing story that's going to be. Thank you, everybody. Good night. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.